These are the things that social media almost never talks about when it comes to navigating a disagreement with someone. Basically, these are the things people do when they disagree, starting with number one, they have a different perspective than you, meaning they might not be gaslighting, they might just do things differently than you do them. They might be an imperfect person who genuinely does not remember phrasing something in the way that you remember it being phrased. Also, you genuinely might not remember accurately the way that they said something or the tone or energy that they were carrying. Another really normal thing that people do when they disagree is state their position more than one time. They might not actually be trying to argue with you. They might be mistakenly, humanly, hoping that if they just say their position another time in another way, or really like reiterate to you what they were intending, that maybe you will see where they were trying to come from. So they might not actually be trying to get you to adopt a different narrative. They might just really be trying to explain themselves and doing it more than once, not because they like to argue, not because they're trying to talk you into thinking something that you don't want to think, but just because they're triggered, they're upset, there's a disagreement, and they're really hoping that if they tell you what they were trying to do a couple of times, you'll believe them. Another thing that people do when they're upset or when there's a disagreement is avoid things. That is something that people do. And they might not be doing it because they have trouble taking responsibility. They might be doing it because they're hoping that with time, cooler heads will prevail. Maybe they're waiting for a better moment to come back and try the conversation again. Or maybe they just really don't have conflict resolution skills. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad person who avoids taking responsibility and ownership for their behavior necessarily. It might mean they just don't know how. Another thing that people do when they disagree or when there's an argument is feel angry. We really have to be careful before we go cutting people out of our lives to differentiate between someone feeling angry and someone taking out their anger on another person, because there is a difference. And another thing that social media seems not to acknowledge is that when people are in a disagreement, when they feel upset, they will defend their point of view, especially if they don't see what they did wrong or they genuinely think that their point of view is a valid one. Defending your personal point of view, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I think you did this thing wrong," that's your right. And if I was your friend and I came to you and I said, "Hey, I think you did this thing wrong," you would have a right to defend your point of view. And again, in a perfect world, everybody would just go, "Oh, I drop all defensiveness, I just take in feedback." But it's just not a perfect world. And so rather than go, "Oh, they got defensive, so they must be the one who's in the wrong," let's pause, let's take a breath, let's acknowledge that sometimes when people disagree, they get defensive. Now, of course, in no way, shape, or form am I saying that you should therefore tolerate any of these behaviors, especially if they're chronic and problematic over the long term. I'm not saying that you should stay in abusive relationships because, oh, people are imperfect. None of that, right? We all have a little corn kernel of common sense around that. What I am saying is that the expectations that we place on others to show up as perfectly serene, calm individuals when we are coming to them and saying, "Hey, I think you did this thing wrong and I don't like it," they can be a little high. And especially, we should check whether or not we live in glass houses, and we should check whether or not our side of the street is clean. Because if we can't fully say with integrity that we are always calm and never get defensive and always take accountability and things like that, when people come to us and say, "I don't like this thing you did," it's pretty hypocritical to expect that of everybody else. Also, I just really want us to normalize our humanity. Okay. I'm human. You're human. Like, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. This happens. And I'm not saying that the impact of those mistakes is negated. I'm just saying the mistakes will happen and we need to give ourselves and others a little more grace.